Hi, I'm Jennifer Wilson, and I'll be presenting alone. My partner is not in this class anymore. So I'm going to be talking about applying a Freirean lens on social justice education by Scott Tharp. Tharp's role at the university was to teach social justice workshops for college students. And while this may not be extremely relevant to each of us in our context, I believe there are points that he makes in this article that we can each learn from, especially those of us who are in the majority culture. So Tharp's question was, how can Freirean ideology help me, a privileged white male, cultivate critical consciousness and facilitate educational dialogue in social justice workshops? Tharp had read Pedagogy of the Oppressed in years past, and he said that it definitely informed his thinking and his work as a white educator in social justice education. However, by not returning to Freire's thinkings and teachings over the years, he felt that he had unintentionally reduced Freire's ideas to just useful facilitation methods. Tharp felt that because of his identity as a white male, and despite his best intentions, his teaching practices were rooted in structures of domination. This point really resonated with me, and that is that meaningful praxis takes time. As a high school teacher, time for reflection on best practices is not often built into my schedule. We are judged most frequently on the outcomes, quantitative assessment of our outcomes, rather than qualitatively on our educational processes. So, this desire that we have to improve is often born out of our own time. Think about what that looks like in your context. What time do you have for a process of reflection? In his article, Tharp discusses Freirean concepts that enhanced his understanding of social justice education, and then he described and analyzed his experiences of applying these principles. While he learned much from Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Tharp insists that one shouldn't stop there with Freire. In later Freirean works that he listed in his references, he cites these additional concepts as meaningful to his growth, and I'll define each of these briefly. He lists class suicide, epistemological circling and curiosity, educational directivity and non-neutrality, and authority versus freedom. Class suicide, as you can read on the screen, is the rejection of material comforts and social privileges associated with dominant group status in order to be in authentic solidarity with the oppressed for liberation. This comes out of a recognition that the comforts and benefits people of privilege have at some level are only possible because of the oppression of others. This makes me think of Musk and Bezos, but of course it isn't only true for billionaires. The article doesn't say this here, but I can imagine after reading some of Freire's other works, I can imagine him describing this almost in religious terms as self-sacrificial love. Epistemological circling and curiosity is the process of questioning reality in order to cultivate knowledge. It is a means of moving closer by gaining a certain kind of distance. There is a connection here between thinking and feeling, recognizing and exploring your emotional responses in order to cultivate a better and deeper understanding of your interactions with others in society. Why did I do that? Why did I say that? Why did I feel that thing in that moment? These practices stem from emotional health and maturity and seem like a really good way just to live your life, even if we're not speaking about social justice issues. Educational directivity and non-neutrality. We know that educators are responsible for leading the practice of education, and education should never be neutral. We've read that Freire believed education is political. There is frequently a demand in society to both sides issues. And sometimes that's called for, but we know that sometimes it's definitely not. So while we do have a certain responsibility as educators, we can't let that keep us from speaking the truth when we need to. And sharing about our own lives and our own choices can also be an important part of relationship building with students. Lastly, we have authority versus freedom. And here we see that despite the inherent power dynamics that exist between teachers and students, authority needs to be balanced. Educators need to also consider their power related to their social location. The question that Freire tries to answer is, how can we simultaneously honor these, authority and freedom, without falling into either freedom without limits on one end or authoritarianism on the other? I think this is a question that Americans are really grappling with right now. The last part of the statement that you see on the screen is that educators need to be aware of their own potential positions of power in society and how that may also affect their interactions with students. After discussing each of these concepts, Tharp comes back to his own social justice courses. Listed here are the areas of his focus. Because they're each very specific to his work, I won't go through all of them in detail, but of course, they're in the article for you to read. But he looks at theoretical and pedagogical approach and how he deals with that in his courses. He looks at negotiating workshops with faculty, how he creates the curriculum workshop or the workshop curriculum that he teaches, curriculum standardization and flexibility. He looks at creating guidelines for the workshops that he teaches, and then personal disclosure, what it is about himself that he shares in his courses. Through this intentional process of reflection, he frequently comes back to the concepts that we just reviewed, and he checks in. Why am I doing it this way? Can I better apply Freirean ideals if I change the way that I approach this? He is honest and often critical of his motivations and practices. This is the hard work of praxis, thoughtful and critical self-reflection combined with action to remedy any weaknesses that he identifies. And finally, he reflects on his reflection. Think of it as praxis squared. This exercise is not the type of activity that we just engage in once and then move on from. As educators and or people in the majority culture, this work of self-reflection must be an ongoing pursuit. I'll close with a statement by Tharp in the last section of his article that reminds me why this ongoing work must continue. No matter how well-intentioned people with privilege are in their work as allies, we are still a socialized product of a world that normalizes systems of oppression. Thanks for listening.